That's good, man. So Homeworld 2 is 20 years old this year, and that probably hit you pretty hard. That's maybe as old as some of your younger siblings, or even some of your kids. So take a second to think on that while I thank today's sponsor. Sorry, who's it? Homeworld? Huh. Yes, actually, this video is sponsored by Gearbox, because right now you can get the Homeworld Remastered Collection for free over on the Epic Store. It is of course still available on other platforms, but if you haven't played it yet and want to prepare yourself for the release of Homeworld 3 in February next year, then this is the way to go. The Remastered Collection includes both Homeworld 1 and 2 Remastered, plus the combined Skirmish mode, and the classic as they were released versions of both games. There's a link in the description to check it out, and thanks again to Gearbox for supporting the channel. 2 decades, man, it's strange to think of a game coming out 2 decades ago that wasn't released in the 90s. I guess I'm going to have to get used to that. We probably all are. It'll be a big day for me when Oblivion hits 20 years old, though thankfully there's still a few years for that. But on a brighter note, Homeworld 2 is still more than playable despite its age. It's the sequel to the pioneering original 3D space RTS after all, and while on release it wasn't quite as well received as that original, it's nonetheless a very well regarded game that has aged well, especially thanks to Homeworld 2 Remastered, released back in 2015. Unlike the original game that had to be rebuilt in Homeworld 2's engine for the remaster, Homeworld 2 Remastered is a near straight upgrade over the original, with much improved visuals and sound, and a bit of a UI overhaul. The benefit for me then is that for this video I can focus on the things that really matter, story and gameplay, without worrying about technical intricacies and other extraneous aspects. Oh, and we can spend some time too with the combined Skirmish mode, since I said we would in my Homeworld 1 video earlier this year. Alright, let's do it then. Please make sure you grab a snack and a glass of your favourite beverage as we look at Homeworld 2 and ask one simple question. Should you play it in 2023? Presentation-wise, the original release of Homeworld 2 was certainly no slouch. It was quite a significant upgrade over its predecessor, but with the remaster today, it's at a whole nother level. While Homeworld 2 versus Homeworld 2 Remastered isn't quite as much of a drastic change as it was with Homeworld 1 and Homeworld 1 Remastered, on account of its age and the different engine, it's still pretty impressive. Putting them side by side, it's quite obvious that there's a over 10-year gap between these games, because the remaster looks damn good. I think I said this in my video on Homeworld 1, but despite the remaster originally releasing 80 years ago in 2015, it still looks really impressive today, and it wouldn't seem out of place graphically as an RTS released this year. Most striking are the skyboxes and the sense of scale. Throughout the campaign you'll visit many a different location, and while gameplay-wise there might not be a ton of variance, visually they are very impressive. Deep reds and amber hues streak across the map, illuminating your ships really nicely. They look awesome too, by the way, as they should, being, the focus of the entire game. Setting-wise, this is over 100 years since the first game, so Hagaran ship designs have evolved a bit since then from their Kushan counterparts. Except the mothership, which looks extremely similar, despite it being an entirely new vessel. Motherships. They never change, do they? There's inspiration to be found in their designs, and overall I think the ships in Homeworld 2 are a marked improvement. The designs are clear developments over the originals, and they remind me of how early World War I tanks look compared to modern ones today. There's clearly an evolution here, but they're much easier on the eyes. I love how a lot of the Hagaran vessels look like they'd be just as at home submerged half in water as they do in space, looking a lot like actual seaborne vessels. The little turrets help a lot in this regard too, and I love zooming in and seeing them all move and track targets independently. It gives a lot of life to the combat encounters, and it just looks cool. And yes, being able to zoom into the tiniest fighter to see its cannon fire and engine streaks, and then zoom out and see a battle of 100 ships take place is still awesome, and it's something that is not matched really in any other RTS, except maybe for Sins of a Solar Empire. Something that often gets overlooked in games, I feel, are the sound effects, particularly the role they have in creating a game's atmosphere and vibe, because here they play a very important part. Explosions and cannon fire thump in the background as you view your fleets, and zooming in is almost overwhelming in its loudness and number of sounds that you're hearing at any one time. The voice acting and music are, of course, both massive contributors to the vibe too. You know, for the remaster, they actually pulled the original performers back into their booths to re-record some of their original lines at higher quality. That's some dedication. That is, except for Fleet Intelligence, for whom the original actor from Homeworld 1 actually returned to reprise the role for Homeworld 2, as in the original Homeworld 2, Fleet Intelligence was an entirely different person. That's continuity I can respect, though I'm not sure how he's still alive after over a century. Maybe he's a kind of Higaran Siri. What I am sure about though is how good the soundtrack is, because, man, Paul Ruskay did great work here. While the story may not be an entirely smooth continuation of the first game, we'll talk about that in a minute, the soundtrack certainly is. There's something very Battlestar Galactica about it that makes me think that there must be some kind of link here. Maybe Bear McCreary is an RTS gamer, I don't know. One of the best aspects of Homeworld has always been its presentation. That was amped up in Homeworld 2, and again here in the Remastered collection. I legitimately think Homeworld 2 Remastered is one of the best RTSs out there in terms of presentation. The graphics are timeless, the lighting's stunning, the music's iconic, and the sound effects just tie it all together. Homeworld 3 has its work cut out for it, because even with the near 10-year gap that's going to exist between it and the Remastered collection, it's going to be really tough to beat. I will say that from what we've seen so far though, it is looking quite promising, and with how good Blackbird were able to make a sterile sand planet look in Deserts of Karak, I am hopeful that they'll be able to pull it off. We'll know soon enough. Homeworld 2 takes place 115 years after the events of the first game, and follows the Higarans on their very now well-established, homeworld. Karen Sajet is somehow still kicking, and they're building a new mothership in secret, for reasons that aren't entirely clear. Turns out it's not actually all that secret though, because just as it's being finished, it's attacked by the Vega, a newish enemy that partly grew out of the collapse of the Titan Empire from the first game. Right after escaping the attack, the Vega blockade the homeworld and demand the Higaran hyperspace core from the mothership, now revealed to be one of 3 in existence, with the goal of gathering them all to unlock the so-called Secret of Sajuk and bring upon the end times. Have fun. And yeah, that's all I'll say. Look, I'm not going to spoil the game here, even though it is kind of old. And I'm not going to tell you what happens in the first game either, but I will talk generally about the vibe and my thoughts on the story without getting into the details. Because I wouldn't be surprised if there's a few of you watching who are excited for Homeworld 3 and haven't played these original games, or even just can't remember what happened. So if that's you, then go get the game for free and play them. After finishing this video, of course. Get up to speed, experience the classics, and you'll be in the best position to enjoy Homeworld 3 when it does release next year. As a sequel to Homeworld 1, personally, I don't love the narrative in Homeworld 2. I think it works better as its own thing, rather than a continuation. Because the first game is just such a great story. It's got a clear beginning and a clear end, and it all gets tied up in a nice bow, and it feels grounded in a way that not many sci-fi stories do. Again, Battlestar. Homeworld 1 is simple but emotive. That simplicity lends to its impact. And it's a story that anyone can get behind, with characters anyone could empathise with. It's hard to follow up on something like that, and I don't love the direction Homeworld 2 takes in terms of its more spiritual and up-in-the-air aspects of prophecy and the Chosen One type narrative elements. Like, imagine if Battlestar went from being this, really serious and dramatic, grounded show with believable technology and no sort of crazy sci-fi elements, to this weird prophetic story about angels and prophecy and divine intervention. Oh. Anyway, I think the prophetic stuff would work better if the game was set way further in the future, like hundreds or thousands of years even. Enough time to where the events of the first game would be a distant memory to the characters in the sequel. That would help to segment both games in a way where Homeworld 2's more fantastical elements wouldn't feel as at odds with the original game. With all that being said though, the story is nowhere near bad,
It's just tough to compete against what is one of the best RTS narratives that was ever made. Mission design in the campaign is similar to that of the original. You're collecting RUs, building fleets from the mothership, and bringing them throughout missions as a persistent entity, though it lacks the "this is all we've got left" vibe from the original. Things are a lot more abundant in the sequel. You're churning through more ships, collecting more resources, and possibly being a bit more blasé about losing critical vessels, though it's still not great to see your carrier go up in flames. There are other gameplay differences that make the campaign feel separate from its predecessor though, mostly thanks to the updated ship rosters and overall mechanical differences between the Kushan fleets of Homeworld 1 and the Higaran fleets of Homeworld 2. Homeworld 1 had a lot of different ship types that all did different things, and that's been refined in the sequel, for better and for worse. I wouldn't say simplified, since it's still a complex mix of rock paper scissors style combat with frigates, corvettes, fighters, and more, with each category having units that excel in different roles. But there is a bit of utility that's been lost, like how the role of repairing has now fallen at the feet of the resource drone, thanks to the lack of any dedicated support ships, like in the first game. I'll also always lament the loss of the salvage corvette. Yes, the marine frigate fills the role mostly, but it's a lot more vulnerable when capturing, thanks to it just having to sit there while it does so. And seeing the salvage corvette actually grab the enemy ships and pull them in was always so much fun. Another big change was the move from building individual fighters and corvettes to squadrons. This makes a lot of sense, I reckon, and overall I do like the change. Same goes for the removal of the fuel requirements as a mechanic, which also happened to Homeworld 1 Remastered, despite it being in the original game. I don't know if anyone out there actually likes fuel. Let me know in the comments if you're one of the rare few. Despite the roster changes, there's still a ton of strategies to be implemented regarding fleet compositions and attack patterns. Different formations help to manage the strengths and weaknesses of your ships, and there are still many different types of ships to make the most of, and that's what really matters. So yeah, the campaign is mechanically interesting, with some unique missions and a decent story.
And do you know what else it is? Really goddamn hard.
Okay, so you see, there's no difficulty setting in Homeworld 2. Difficulty scaling is implemented, and it's based on your fleet size, meaning if you enter a mission with a big fleet, the enemy fleet will also be big. And if you enter with a small one, the enemy fleet will be small, but relative to you, it'll still be big. Basically, no matter how many ships you have, the game will always be working to deliver you a challenge. And this isn't inherently bad, but it does mean that if you Google search any Homeworld 2 mission name, there's always a result with someone asking if it's impossible. There are ways of bringing the difficulty down though, mostly through cheesing the mission structure. If you melt your fleet before a mission ends, the next one will be easier because you'll start with nothing, meaning the enemy fleet will be smaller than if you started with a lot of ships, and then you can build back to your original big numbers with the resources you got from melting your fleet. This does take time though, and it's made harder by the fact that Homeworld 2 automatically ends the mission when your objective is complete, whereas in the original game, you could end a mission when you were good and ready, making this strategy a bit hard to implement. Another option is to simply follow a guide. It's not as streamlined, but it gets the job done. You could also just get good. Okay, that sounds derogatory, I don't mean it that way, I actually mean it literally. Like if you learn some strategies, take your time, and assess each situation without just throwing your fleets away for nothing, then you'll probably only get annihilated some of the time. The last option is probably the best one though, and that's the Homeworld Remastered Players Patch. It exists to fix some bugs, rebalance some ships, and add a difficulty slider to the campaign to take the edge off. If you're playing on Steam, it's available on the workshop, but I'm not 100% sure on how it will work with the Epic Store yet. I presume it'll be like the good old games version, where you download and install it manually via ModDB, but I'm not totally sure. But yeah, in all seriousness, the campaign is not impossible, it's just tough, but it is very fulfilling. Homeworld 2's campaign rewards the thinking player, and completing it on its intended difficulty may just be as close as you'll be able to say you've achieved the feat of beating the Dark Souls of RTS.
Skirmish is entirely new in Homeworld Remastered, as it combines all 4 factions from the first and second game into one joint mode. and it's playable against AI, PvP, whatever mix you want. And if you want to play the original classic skirmishes, then you of course can still do that. You just have to launch the old classic games and you can do it through there. Having all factions able to be played against or alongside one another makes for quite an intriguing proposal. How would the Kushan from Homeworld 1, with their individual fighter craft and salvage corvettes, stack up against the Higarans from Homeworld 2, with their fighter squadrons and not salvage corvettes? Well, it's quite balanced thankfully. They're like any 4 factions in an RTS. Each have their own roster with unique strengths and weaknesses, and it comes down to personal preference and your own skill to which is going to perform best. You'll find differences across the rosters in many avenues, like in which ships they can deploy and abilities they can research. And while the general classes of ship are mostly the same for all 4, there are finer differentials in armaments and capabilities. The Destroyer is a good example of this. While both the Vega and Higaran versions are capable of delivering heavy damage, the Vega Destroyer is more adept at fighting up strike craft because it's got 5 of these little guns scattered across the hull, while the Higaran Destroyer's fast-firing kinetic guns can take out frigates and smaller craft more effectively than its counterpart. There are other faction specialities too, like how the Kushan are adept at early game attacks, thanks to their mothership and carriers being able to build 2 ships at once rather than 1, and how they can hyperspace jump without an extra module right from the start. That all sounds great, and it is, but it's paid for by their lack of mid to late game power. They simply just can't match the other factions in a straight gunfight once the game develops, so you've got to be smart. These finer details, along with Homeworld's frankly complex positioning systems, mean there is a lot of room to become really good at combat. If you're adept enough to control what angle ships attack from, to dodge particular weapons, deploy the right counters against the right enemy, and target specific subsystems to best serve your fleet, you'll quickly become a Homeworld god. Seriously, playing against someone who is at this level makes the campaign feel like a baby's first RTS game. But whether you're playing solo or multiplayer, Skirmish in the Remastered Collection is a great time. On the one hand, playing solo is quite unique to the campaign as a single player experience, mainly because that, for once, you're actually on equal footing with the AI, unlike the campaign where you're basically on the back foot, both narratively and mechanically, the entire time. So it's nice to have an even playing field with all the ships unlocked, ready to duke it out. Plus here, there's a difficulty setting. Yeah! There's also the extra modifiers of having larger teams, playing with different factions, and having the mothership be hot pink. How nice. I much prefer multiplayer as a co-op experience against the AI, like I do in most games. Thankfully, in both cases there's crossplay that's just been added across Steam and Epic, which is unfortunately not a given on PC sometimes with games on separate platforms, so that's good to see. Now, a quick word on mods. Like some other games I've covered, I'm going to be creating a separate video very soon showcasing some of my favourites. So leave any suggestions you have down below of the ones I should play. I'm hoping to get about half a dozen to dedicate some time to, and I've got a couple in mind, so far away. At this point, I'm sure you could have guessed the outcome of this video. Yes, you should play Homeworld 2 in 2023. I hope it's obvious. The Remastered Collection did a lot for the series. Despite a few initial teething issues, it's a great way to get into the series and catch up for Homeworld 3 without the usual issues that come with playing 20-year-old RTS games on modern PCs. Both games are hard, no doubt about it, and while I was on the struggle bus with Homeworld 1 Remastered, I might actually argue that Homeworld 2 Remastered is harder thanks to its mission design. So if you're looking for a challenge, this is definitely going to provide it for you. If you're someone who's excited for Homeworld 3 and has somehow watched this entire video and got to this point without playing the first 2, then look, this is your final message to do so. Go and grab the Remastered Collection for free and get 2 of the best RTSs ever made. You can even play the originals as they were released to get more of a feel of how groundbreaking they both were, especially the first game, but hey, I'll give the second game credit there too. And it'll also make it really obvious how much of a glow up the remaster provided. Thanks again to Gearbox for sponsoring this video, it's much appreciated. You can go and grab the games for free on the Epic Store right now between these dates here, using the link below. Homeworld 2 mods video to follow, as well as my Cataclysm/Emergence review. I did originally have them scheduled to come out as the game is released, but, you know, things happen. It'll be out soon. So thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me further, then you can do so by joining the existing lovely people on Patreon or here on YouTube memberships. You can do so for as little as $1 a month, and you'll get access to the Discord where we play RTS games every month or so. I see people in there playing games with each other as well, which is super cool, and there's some other benefits too. So if you want to do that, then you'll join legends like Aero, Jack Walsh, Nutty Jawa, Overlord Jeebus, T Edits, Crispy Robo Chicken, XB204, Benjamin, David, Cynical Cheddar, Sebastian, Luke, Dakayo, Nintendo, Bad Ghosts, Sean, Grey Spirit 4, Peter, Tim, George, Netters, John Kaiser, and Juan, and Johnny, Marika, Eric, Age of Cause, Joe, and Tank at the Paladin tier. So thank you very much. And also thanks to Pavel, who just joined the Patreon yesterday. Much appreciated. Thanks, man. So thank you all again very much for watching. This drink is very nice, by the way, so I'm going to go finish this and get this video done. So I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Drink responsibly. Cheers.